Thanks, Hannah. Right, so an introduction to the Energy Learning Network, or ELN as it's known for short. Firstly, my apologies to anyone who's heard this before in previous events. However, this is for the benefit of anyone who hasn't. So, slide one, please. Oh, sorry, the cover slide. You can leave that there for now. Thanks, Hannah. So ELN is an ambitious UK-wide programme working with partners, Community Energy Wales, Community Energy England, Action Renewables in Northern Ireland, the Ashton Climate Solutions, and the Centre for Sustainable Energy. So that's what, 6 of us all together. It's a 3+ year programme which started last year, and it's funded by the National Lottery. And the ELN staff in Community Energy Scotland are myself, Hannah, and our colleague Dara Keenahan. So the programme builds on the work already being delivered by the community energy sector by helping grow the sharing of knowledge and expertise, facilitating networking opportunities, and delivering and promoting accessible resources to support community energy projects. So just a point to clarify, the context of community energy is broad in the sense of the ELN programme, and essentially we're talking about existing, new and up-and-coming community-led groups and organisations working on energy activity, which could include energy efficiency advice, collective retrofitting work, heat network, sustainable transport even, EV charger infrastructure, and of course, energy generation. Second slide, please, Hannah. Our own role of the 6 partners, we are supporting communities in Scotland to reach their community energy project potential. We're expanding our online resources to help existing groups and organisations and those wishing to become part of the sector. We're hosting learning and networking events like this one that you're attending today. And there will be a lot more events coming through the programme in the future. We are listening to our members' needs to help shape the ongoing plans of the programme. And that also comes from guidance from the advisory board that's just been set up, which is made up of community energy organisations and others with community energy interests. We're also further developing our own working relationships to help build a wider support structure for community energy and for the groups involved. The next slide, please, Hannah. So the bigger ELN picture, as it were, in terms of the whole programme, it's as I said, a UK-wide programme, and there are UK-wide online events as well as those that we're hosting through Community Energy Scotland. The programme is developing ways for emerging community energy groups to get on board with the sector. It's creating opportunities for learning and networking more widely, raising the awareness, and this is really important, raising the awareness that community energy is a realistic and possible solution. We all know this, most of us here already know this, but you'd be surprised how many people out with our sector actually don't realise how realistic and viable it is. Also working alongside other climate change groups and local authorities, again, to strengthen that structure to support community groups with their work. And the programme is currently offering a free peer mentoring service for members. The application deadline has passed for that, so those of you who have come on board with that, good luck with that. That should be a really good experience for you. The next slide, please, Hannah. So just quickly, some useful links, which you'll have access to once you get a copy of these slides after this session. You've got some useful web pages there, links to, and also the links to some webinar recordings that have happened in the past, both Community Energy Scotland and UK-wide. Thank you for your attention. And now I'll hand you over to Christina from Local Energy Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you. So yeah, just to start with a little bit of an introduction. My name is Christina. I'm a shared ownership specialist with Local Energy Scotland. I believe my colleague Mark Brennan is here somewhere in the room. He'll be on hand to answer questions during the Q&A also. So I'm based in Edinburgh, Mark's based in Inverness, so we sort of split our support geographically. I support projects that are Central Belt and South, and Mark's Highlands and Islands. Um, much as I angle to get a visit to Orkney or Shetland, I haven't managed it yet. And an introduction to Local Energy Scotland. We are a consortium of the organisations that you see on this slide, and our role is to administer the Scottish Government's Community and Renewable Energies scheme. So that's the fund that we are administering. Next slides, please. Thanks. So what is shared ownership? People have different understandings. So this is just to kind of make sure that we're on the same page with what we're talking about for this context. This definition comes from the Scottish Government's Good Practice Principles for Shared Ownership. And their definition of that is any structure that involves a community group as a financial partner with what is usually a developer-led renewable energy project. So the good practice principles are a really important document to be aware of if you're interested in shared ownership. I've included a link here. You'll get these slides, I think. So you've got that to have a read through, and that really underpins the support that's available through CARES. And it's important to note also that shared ownership is something that should be separate and in addition to a community benefit fund offer. So there can sometimes be a sort of perception that it's either or, and community groups can be concerned that if they say that they might be interested in an offer of shared ownership from a developer, that's putting their community benefit fund at risk. But that isn't the case. The community benefit fund should be there no matter what happens with shared ownership. And the other point to make that's kind of related to that, I suppose, is that in those early stages, if a developer mentions shared ownership and community benefit funds, what I suggest to groups is just kind of keeping that door open to shared ownership and saying you would be interested in an offer, even if it feels sort of so difficult that you think it might not be possible. The development itself will be years away at that stage, and you don't know what might change in that time. And also, you're not committing your community group to an investment if you say you would be interested in an offer and further discussion too. So I always suggest that it's a good idea to just keep that offer open and keep it on the table with the developer. Next slide, please. So important to note here that there should always be an offer of shared ownership on all renewable energy projects, and that includes repowering and extensions. So that does mean there should be an offer that community groups have the opportunity to explore. It doesn't necessarily mean that there will always be an element of shared ownership with every project that's built, because there are lots of reasons that might not go forward. Communities might decide it's too high risk, or the return isn't great enough, or there's lots and lots of reasons that it might not go ahead. But there should always be the offer that community groups have the opportunity to explore. Next slide, please. So all of this on the slide comes from the good practice principles that I mentioned earlier. So these models here are the kind of general options that are available for shared ownership structures. Split ownership, we're not seeing so much at the moment. I think that's harder for community groups to make financially viable since the end of feed-in tariffs. That's not to say that it's not still possible. We're just not seeing many groups asking us about that or many offers of that from developers. But it's still absolutely worth now. It is primarily for the local community, but it can be widened, and I think that this is a real benefit of shared ownership kind of in comparison, I guess, to community benefit funds. Community benefit funds will, normally go to the community council areas that are kind of the statutory consultees on developments. Whereas with shared ownership, there's that opportunity to kind of widen that out. So if you have an area that maybe doesn't have an established organization that can explore that opportunity, it is possible to look a little bit wider at maybe another organization that's still working in that local community, but just kind of location wise might be a little bit outside of it, to make sure that that opportunity is not lost. Next slide, please. So this is the kind of usual process. That first point in particular, this isn't necessarily an ideal scenario, but this is kind of what tends to happen. So because community councils are statutory consultees for developments, this is where a developer will know approaching. So you might be aware of that because you've looked at planning applications that have gone in. You might have had a notification of a consultation on a new development. Whether there is or isn't any mention of shared ownership in that, community groups absolutely can ask developers what the offer is going to be. And I would suggest that that's a good idea, both to kind of stake that kind of interest, put that interest on the table for shared ownership really early on for your community group, and to kind of start that conversation. And I think that the more that happens, the more seriously developers will take community groups and community interest in shared ownership. So on that kind of wider level, I think that's a really good step to take also. So it should involve, even though that initial kind of discussion will often start with community councils, it's really ideal to involve other development trusts or other types of community development bodies that might be in that local area. It's really not the remit or role of community councils to buy shares in a local wind farm. And it will end up being another body that ultimately does that. So it just makes sense to sort of look at the organizations that are already existing in that area, to explore that opportunity, and potentially, if there's more than one, to work together to explore that opportunity. This can be a little bit tricky. There are some kind of cold spots, I guess, where there just aren't, maybe isn't a development trust or there isn't a community body that might be able to explore that offer. And again, this is where you can look at sort of widening that out and looking at who, if there's another nearby organization that might be able to do that or look into it. In that case, where you might have a group of organizations working together, it's just good practice to sort of appoint an organization as a lead. That will be a point of contact for the developer. That will be a point of contact also for Local Energy Scotland if you apply to our funding. We need sort of one lead body that we would, the application would come from and whose bank account the funding would go into. But that is a sort of practical role, really. That body wouldn't have any additional sort of power or decision. They shouldn't be making any sort of unilateral decisions for the rest of the community. I think next slide, please. So in terms of support from Local Energy Scotland, there are grants that are available for legal and financial advice throughout the process. So at the very early stages, you will want to get legal advice on any documents that you might be presented by the developers. So that's probably going to be an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding. There might be other things that come up at that stage, and you can get legal advice to help you understand what it is you're signing, and potentially to sort of negotiate clauses in it if that's necessary. And then further down the line, you'll need further legal advice on things like your structure, the body that makes the investment, other kind of documents along the way, and then of course financial advice in the later stages when the developer is able to give you detailed financial information about the project. We can help link you up with legal advisors that we know have experience in this space, but you also might have legal advisors that you've worked with on other projects, and you are welcome to use somebody else. So you don't have to use our kind of legal advisors that we might recommend, and we can recommend a financial advisor also. We can offer support with facilitating meetings with developers. A lot of developers don't have a lot of experience with shared ownership, and might need a little bit of guidance through that process also. And that's part of our role, to work with developers as well as community groups. So we're very happy to kind of come in as much as we're needed, as much as asked by community organizations with that, as well as just kind of guidance throughout the process also. We've put on several training sessions, kind of webinars over the last sort of year or so in response to a lot of the questions that we frequently get from community groups. So for example, we had Locagen run a session for us about the process of developing a wind farm for developers, for private developers, from start to finish, and the points where community organizations might have a discussion with a developer about shared ownership. So that's online. I've included links at the end of this also to some of these. We had Burness Paul run a session for us on the legal structures, the type of body that you might set up to make an investment, pros and cons, what's useful about a company, what's useful about a community benefit society, for example. We've also been looking at some guidance and some standardized documents for both developers and community groups. So we have an MOU on our website that comes with guidance that was written by Burness Paul. And that is really for kind of a very, very early stage. So that's maybe a project that is not even in planning yet, to say, if it is consented, then there's going to be a discussion between the community organization and the developer about a community benefit fund and also a shared ownership offer. I'm sorry for the acronyms here. I should have possibly spelled these out, but we've also are in the process of working with Burness Paul, who are doing some guidance about non-disclosure agreements for us. So that is a document that developers will often present communities with to protect sensitive financial information. So what this guidance will cover is both for community groups and for the developer, what is an appropriate kind of level of NDA for this situation, because sometimes a developer might give a community group the same kind of NDA that they would present to maybe another developer, which will not always be appropriate in that context. So, and then also helping community organizations to understand some of the common clauses in that agreement, and what it means for them and what they're signing up to. Next slide, please. Okay, so on this table, it's sort of the current pipeline that we see for shared ownership projects. So the number in parentheses is from 2023, and the number to the left is from last year, from 2024. So possibly what's quite interesting about this is the jump in early stage. So what we mean by that, the advanced stage projects are where there is a discussion, there's some kind of negotiation going on between a developer and community group or groups about a shared ownership offer. Early stage means there's really just probably some mention of shared ownership in their planning documents. So whilst that's a fairly kind of non-committal stage for shared ownership, it's pretty easy for developers to mention it in a planning document. I think it's interesting the increase in that we've seen from the year previous. And I think it gives community groups, something to start with. It gives a good starting point for organizations to go to the developer and say, this is in your planning documents that there's going to be an offer of shared ownership, or, it says in your planning documents that there will be an offer of up to X% of a share in this wind farm. When can we expect information about that? Next slide, please. How am I on time? So in terms of kind kind of again the landscape, I guess, and what we're seeing over the last couple of years, we've seen a lot of groups coming together to work together, particularly in areas where there might be multiple developments that are in the pipeline that they're going to be affected by. What community groups and areas are starting to do is kind of work together a little bit more. And having that collective voice with developers has a lot of benefits. It widens out the capacity. It means that they have, a kind of, they are representing a wide area and a lot of the population. And that can be that can put them in a good position in terms of negotiation with developers. So these are just a few examples of those ways of working, and these are fairly early stages. Most of these, I think, kind of various stages of advice and where those projects are. The Newlands Hill wind farm, for example, is still in planning. That hasn't got consent yet, so we're not sure what's happening with that. But yeah, that's just an interesting trend that we see. And then what happens from our side, it's these groups will come to us, put in an application, and then we kind of start the process of support from there. Next slide, please. This is just to note also, we have recently added, we've hosted for some time a community benefit fund register on our website. We've now added to this a shared ownership register. That's a work in progress. It's going to take a little while before it's kind of as populated as the community benefit fund register is. But once it is, I think it's going to be a really useful tool to look at where the offers are and to help communities to look at, here's where development is near us. There's an offer of shared ownership. This is who the developer is. This is the stage that it's at, and we can, look at getting in touch with that developer or looking at other community groups in that area that we might want to work with on that offer. So at the moment, it just has sort of current operational shared ownership, current operational projects where there is an element of shared ownership. Over the coming months, it will include projects where that are in development, that are in pre-planning. I think it's going to take some time because it's developers that are updating the register, and there's a kind of process, a sort of annual review that they do of their information on the register. So depending on that kind of cycle of reviews that different developers are in, it's going to take a little bit of time for that to be updated. So that's a watch this space, I suppose. And then the last slide that I've got here is just the resources that I've mentioned. So you'll have those links after this session. Thanks. I think I'm handing over to Morven.
Thank you, Christina. Sorry, I was a little bit slow there. Yes, Morven, please take the floor.
Thanks, Kath. Thanks, Christina. So hi folks, my name is Morven Lyon and I'm Head of Democratic Finance at the Development Trust Association Scotland. So just a wee bit of context first of all in terms of why I've been asked to speak about shared ownership today. As Christina mentioned, there's the wider development trust context in terms of what DTAS does and the fact that a development trust is often quite an appropriate body to pursue shared ownership. I'll also tell you a little bit about our involvement with the Scottish Community Coalition on Energy and how that relates to our policy asks on shared ownership. I'm also going to talk a little bit about the Democratic Finance Programme that DTAS is running and how those financing options, again, play into the shared ownership context. So first of all, just on DTAS, so for those that don't know, so DTAS, we're a membership-led organisation, so we support over 350 development trusts across Scotland, mainly providing advice, support, training, publications. We've got an annual conference. What is a development trust? So 3 key elements. It has to be community-led, so membership-based, a 2-tier structure, and it has to be place-based. A development trust always has an enterprising approach, so often delivering numerous services, projects, owning assets, for example. And it should all be underpinned by a community action plan with really good community engagement and community consultation. So you can see why a development trust might be a good governance structure to pursue shared ownership. As I mentioned, we're part of the Scottish Community Coalition on Energy, which I'll tell you about shortly. This is a coalition of membership-led organisations, and we're seeking to ensure that there's a just transition that benefits all communities across Scotland. And we've got a number of policy asks, and we've got a specific working group on shared ownership. Next slide, please, Hannah. So the Democratic Finance Programme, so this is relatively new. This emerged from the Community Shares Scotland programme that DTAS has been running for about 10 years. So this was launched last year in partnership with Scottish Communities Finance. And what it is, it's a programme of support for community enterprises to consider alternative citizen-led methods of raising funding and finance. So we know that groups are far too dependent on grant funding, and also there's sometimes a bit of a nervousness around taking on debt. So the programme is looking at what are the alternative methods of raising funding and finance, and can those methods come from citizens themselves? And I'll tell you a bit more about that. The point of this is for those democratic community enterprises to then be able to take ownership of important assets and businesses in their community, and shared ownership could be an opportunity there. So what is citizen-led sources of funding? I pulled out the kind of 4 key themes. So first of all being community shares. I'm not going to go through each of these in detail, but if anyone wants individual people and organisations invest into the project, and in return they get membership of that organisation. Millions of pounds has been raised through community shares, and a lot of that has gone towards community energy projects. Community bonds is a very similar mechanism, but it's debt finance rather than equity ownership finance. So it's a much more straightforward financial arrangement with that individual. And again, with community bonds, we're wanting the money to come from local people. So you're saying to somebody, can you invest in our project? Whether it's £25, whether it's £10,000, whatever that person can afford. And in return, with shares, you get ownership, and with community bonds, you obviously get a financial return. And both community shares and community bonds are repayable. So you aim to pay those back over often about 10 to 20 years. And then very quickly, the other 2 things that we're looking at within the Democratic Finance Programme. Number 1 is local legacy and philanthropic giving. So we know that lots of people leave their legacy to national charities, but there's not very much legacy giving to local community development charities. We feel like there's a bit of a potential gap in the market there. So we're running a pilot on this at the moment with 10 development trusts about trying to launch a local legacy giving campaign. And again, this could be a way for community organisations to raise finance for shared ownership. And finally, donation-based crowdfunding, so something that's been going on for a long time, but again, could be part of the funding package for shared ownership. Clearly, these methods are not going to provide all of the finance needed for shared ownership. They're going to have to be matched against grants, particularly those development grants that Christina's talking about from CARES, and also some debt finance and some debt that is very affordable, very patient, very long term. Next slide, please, Hannah. Quick case study from our membership. And just to say, as a kind of some overall stats, we only have, I'd say, half a dozen maximum development trusts at the moment that actually have a shared ownership arrangement in place. So it's very small in terms of numbers. However, we have lots and lots of development trusts where they're having early stage conversations, as Christina was mentioning. So this is actually a case study from about 15 years ago in terms of the shared ownership arrangement. But I think it is a good example because it shows the kind of long-term benefits. So this is Fintry Development Trust in Stirlingshire that some of you might be aware of. So they established a subsidiary, so Fintry Renewable Energy Enterprise, to take a 1/15th ownership stake of the Elsburn wind farm in 2007. The finance that they needed was £2.5 million. This was a loan that they got. And as of 2023, that has been fully paid back. And now they have a pretty considerable income from that shared ownership arrangement. It's around £400,000 a year. In terms of some of the positives from the shared ownership arrangement, this is directly from the group themselves. So they're able to support the community through grants, so direct grants for fuel poverty, cost of living crisis. For their other projects, as I was saying, they're not as reliant on grant finance that is ever diminishing at the moment. The shared ownership income provides employment for 3 staff and for other consultants. And crucially, it gives them the freedom to think outside the box and then to push boundaries for environmental solutions in their community. So that's the good stuff. So in terms of some of the challenges, clearly this is a big deal. Shared ownership is a big deal. So it places a burden on those often volunteer trustees. So there's a lot of responsibility needed. The financial governance around that as well, clearly is something that groups need to seriously think about before they enter into a shared ownership arrangement. And then in terms of what the money is going to do in the community, there's a big burden around decision making and what would benefit the community most, and making sure that there's good community consultation and engagement around the use of the money. And clearly not everyone is going to agree with what the trustees and the members decide the money should go towards. So responding to those who disagree and taking that feedback on board is often a challenge as well. Thanks, Hannah. Next slide. Christina's already covered this, so very in sync. So yeah, just to kind of reiterate, I guess, the point that Christina's making, because I think it's a really crucial one, that as I was saying, shared ownership is it's not straightforward. This is a big financial investment, clearly has a lot of risks, takes a lot of capacity, often through volunteer trustees or board members. So I do think that there is an opportunity here to have a collaborative approach in terms of increasing that capacity, not just in terms of people, but also in terms of the finance that you might be able to raise. I'm not going to repeat what Christina's just said, but I think it's interesting here just to kind of maybe quickly note the governance models. So Community Energy Moray is a Moray-wide collaborative approach to shared ownership, and they've gone for a community benefit society governance structure. The key strength of this is that you can only issue community shares and community bonds if you are a community benefit society. So if that is something that you want to utilise, then it's worth considering your governance very early stage in terms of potentially establishing as a community benefit society. A more standard model might be just a straightforward company limited by guarantee. If that has charitable status, it might be that a trading subsidiary is set up, as with Fintry Development Trust, to take forward the shared ownership arrangement. Or there's the SKIO model as well. Great. Next slide, please, Hannah. So this is a lot of words, so I'm not going to go through everything on here, but I think these slides will be shared afterwards. I just wanted to give you the full context of the Scottish Community Coalition on Energy, and I'm going to pick out the policy asks that are specific to shared ownership. So the members of this coalition are DTAS, Community Energy Scotland and Community Land Scotland. So the 3 key community development membership bodies in Scotland, so making sure that we're representing the community voice. And our purpose, as I said, is to secure a fair energy deal for Scottish communities. So we have 4 policy asks for the UK Gov, and we've got 6 policy asks for Scottish Government. Yeah, not going to go through them all, but just to pull out the ones that are relevant. So in terms of the UK government policy asks, number 1, support community energy groups to build skills and capacity. This is the biggie. So if we want shared ownership and if we want 100% community ownership, we need to fund people, we need to fund capacity within community organisations to have the time and the resource to take this forward. And we welcome the new money that's potentially going into CARES this year and also through GB Energy. Number 3 in the UK Gov policy asks, so to give community energy projects priority in the grid connection queue. So this is specifically for 100% community owned energy projects, but I think there's potentially some considerations around shared ownership here as well. So if a developer is offering shared ownership and has that secured, then could they potentially be given some priority in the grid connection queue? And then just a couple of the Scottish Government policy asks to pull out. So number 2 is all around repowering. So there are a bunch of turbines across Scotland that are coming to the end of their working life and need repowered. And we feel like this is a real opportunity for communities to be offered, whether it's 100% ownership or shared ownership as part of that repowering process. And number 4, just to pick this up, because this is very crucial for shared ownership. So we have, as Christina mentioned, the good practice principles for shared ownership. However, they were last updated in 2019. So we're asking for them to be updated. Great, and just my final slide, please, Hannah. So I want to just focus finally on some of the key challenges that we're seeing on shared ownership and what we think needs to happen or needs to change. Some of the key challenges we are observing there are still very, very low awareness levels of shared ownership. We think that there's a lack of clarity from Scottish and UK government on shared ownership ambition. So there are targets that have been set, but we need to revisit those, make sure they're being met, and potentially have some refocused targets. We've also observed that there's generally very low developer appetite for shared ownership. There's quite a lot of enthusiasm in the pre-planning phase, but when they get planning, anecdotally, we hear that enthusiasm drops off a cliff. Community capacity to progress, I talked about that already. Securing low-cost patient finance. So there aren't any bespoke financing products for shared ownership at the moment, and that's something that needs to be addressed. And yeah, lack of fair opportunities for all. So as we've talked about, I think we need to widen out shared ownership to a more collaborative, potentially regional approach in some areas. And then just one final move on, please, Hannah. Thank you. So some of the asks, just to get into a little bit more detail, we're asking for some more proactive mapping around shared ownership. So what Christina was updating on sounds great, and that will contribute to some early stage awareness raising. So we want groups to be able to go on to an online map and to be able to see what developments are coming in their area, and then be able to proactively approach those developers. As I've said, we want more clarity in Scottish Government ambitions and targets, including this crucial update to the good practice principles for shared ownership. Funding for community capacity building and standardised frameworks. As Christina's mentioned, there's lots of work underway on that, which we support. We are really keen for it to be mandatory for developers to offer shared ownership. Again, anecdotally, we hear that an offer of shared ownership can be something as simple as a leaflet through the door, and we just don't think that's acceptable. So that needs to be mandatory for developers to offer, and it needs to be really clear what that means in terms of a meaningful, timely, transparent offer. And then finally, to develop the funding market for shared ownership. As I've said, democratic finance can be an excellent match funding, but we need bespoke, affordable loan finance, whether that's through GB Energy, whether that's through SNIB or other social investment lenders, but we need to crowd that in. I think that's me. Is that the last slide, Hannah? Yep. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Morven. Over to Simon Lee now, please, from Far North Community Development Trust.
Oh God, it's me. I'm on. Oh God. Right. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, that's all very positive. I quite enjoyed that from Morven and Christina there. Very, very positive. I'll try not to ruin the day. Hey, it would be really bad form. So hello, this is where I'm from. This is a little map of the north of Scotland. So that's the far north coast of Scotland. And the area highlighted in blue is the area that we cover. It's three community council areas, and yeah, next slide, please, Hannah. Oh, you're gonna have to be quicker. There we go. And it's as you might expect from the map, it's an extremely dramatic, very beautiful place, very rugged. The interesting thing about these photographs is if you look really carefully, you can see public services disappearing over the horizon. So we really have a sort of sense of abandonment as most of the services are commissioned out of Inverness, and they're obviously overstretched, and it's unfair to say they're retreating. They just can't stretch this far north, and there's a real need, we think, for our communities to take control and start being able to deliver services for ourselves. And that's very much the driver as to why we are interested in shared ownership. The whole area is about 1,000 square kilometres. There's less than 1,000 people in it. There's a lot more sheep. Next slide, please. So why am I here? I'm supposed to be a case study, which is yeah, well, I'm a case study. In the last 10 years, 10, 12 years, I have engaged with developers for these wind farms. Each of these little double icons represents one development. There's 16 on that map. So I've had 16 discussions with developers and/or been involved with trying to develop community wind farm, actually the community doing the development itself. And so I guess that's what led Community Energy Scotland to invite me onto this. I've got quite a lot of experience of talking to people. So the 16 there, if we click to the next slide, please. These are the ones that are actually consented or under construction or built.
My spell check suggestions and minor.
What happened then?
I'm not sure what happened there, but you've got your sound back now, Simon.
Yeah, thank you. Yes.
No idea what that was.
Somebody pressed the AI button and the AI tried to interpret what Simon was saying, I think.
Oh dear. No, I'll always defeat artificial intelligence. Well, I probably won't. So there's 6 there. So from 16, we've gone down to 6 developments that actually appear to be going somewhere. The ones that I've taken out have either gone because people have decided they're not practical and they're not going to happen, or quite a lot of them are still stuck in planning. So they haven't gone all together. But these 6 are the ones that have actually been built and remain for now. If we go to the next slide, these are the 2 active shared ownership discussions that I'm currently involved in. So in 12 years or so, I've been in 16 discussions, and after those 12 years, I'm left with 2 discussions, none of which have been sealed yet. So these are quite advanced in terms of, have we got shared ownership in the bag? Nearly. but that's a hell of a lot of investment and a hell of a lot of time to actually, if you've been really cold about it, get nowhere. So I'm still sat talking to people and not actually doing anything. So I think it's kind of an important message to get across. This is a really, really long game, and it's very difficult. And yeah, so just be warned. So we go to the next slide then, please. So just a few little things just to warn you about if you're thinking of going on to a shared ownership journey. The first point I've already made, it takes a very, very long time. I think the second point here is a really important point, and that is that nobody knows what they're doing. And I mean, nobody knows what they're doing, and particularly developers, they don't know what they're doing. In fact, quite a lot of developers can barely internalize the difference between shared ownership and community benefit. So very often when you go to meet a developer to try and have a shared ownership discussion, you have to spend the first half hour and actually the next half hour assuring them that they are different things. Community benefit and shared ownership are different things. And I mean, the picture's getting better. More developers do understand it, but we still find people don't really understand. And this can be difficult, particularly difficult with corporates, with large corporations. And it's not so much a difficulty with the people you're talking to, but what they have to then do is take the message and pass that up the management chain. So each step of that management chain, they are meeting people who don't understand the difference and don't understand what shared ownership is. And that makes discussions and negotiations very, very difficult. People don't believe you can do it. This includes members of our community, as well as developers who just look at you with aghast to imagine that a little community who they think is really mainly concerned with village hall curtains can actually raise millions of pounds to invest in a wind farm. So there is a real sort of credibility gap, as was talked about earlier, which we need to understand so that people understand that shared ownership is real and it can be done. And I suspect if you went on this journey, you'd also meet similar challenges. I'm always combating misinformation, misunderstanding. The common one I come across is that if we buy a share in a wind farm and the wind farm goes out of business, then there's going to be various people in the community who are going to lose their homes. And it doesn't matter how often you explain corporate governments or how often you sit down and draw out little diagrams and and tell people that actually this isn't how it's going to work. It just never goes away. It's stuck in people's heads that this is a risky idea and people are going to lose their homes, and that makes it quite difficult to maintain momentum in the community, quite apart from the time it takes. It's quite difficult to maintain momentum because there's constantly this niggle in the back of their minds that this is just an extraordinarily dangerous thing to try and do. And then you get to the final point there, which is how will you raise the money? That's an issue I haven't really encountered yet. I've never quite got that far. I've had discussions with financial people and with bankers and things like that, but we've never really got down to nitty gritty. But one of the things that I've come to realize in the last couple of years is it's not just about raising the money, it's understanding how the money flows back. And if we can go to the next slide, please. This is a kind of this is taken from a real example of an analysis we were doing with a possible shared ownership project some years ago. And the y-axis here is income to the community group, and you've got time running along the x-axis. And these bars on the y-axis, there might be 1,000, it might be 10,000. It doesn't really matter. The principle is you are very likely to have to raise a lot of money, a lot of debt finance to invest in your wind farm. And then you're very likely to have to spend the first 15 years or so repaying that loan. So for the first here up to about 2044, you're hardly seeing any money coming back. And then suddenly you're absolutely rolling in it, which is fantastic. But it's kind of, if I was to pull off this project, if we were to manage to get the finance to invest in this project, or if we had been able to, we would have made a big song and dance about it. We would have borrowed millions. We'd have borrowed millions of pounds, and we'd have got a share of the ownership, and the community would have been all excited. And then they'd have seen this little dribble of money coming back. Now, I don't know how your communities work, but I know that in our communities, this kind of thing would be interpreted as someone's pocketing a lot of money somewhere, and that would probably be Simon who set this whole thing up. And maybe it's a very silly concern of mine, but I do think that this is going to happen. That I think we are going to pull this off, or a similar project to this, and I'm going to spend the next 10 years pleading poverty and nobody believing me, because they all think I've pocketed it. It's a very, very difficult communication challenge, not necessarily because it's difficult to say what needs to be said. It's an easy enough situation to explain. The difficulty is nobody can be bothered to listen, and it's far more fun to sit round a table in the pub and make up stories than it is to actually hear the truth. So it is a challenge that I think is coming down the line. Hasn't happened yet, and I just thought I'd share with you my anxieties. Next slide, please. So if you're thinking of doing this, here's a few nuggets which might help you, maybe. The first is, and this is so important, you need to find a champion, you need to find a superhero in the wind farm development company at a senior level who will champion your corner. As you go and speak to developers, particularly the larger ones, you will meet a community liaison manager, or a communication manager, or a community benefit manager. All very, very nice people, but not really the sort of people you need to be talking to if you're talking about trying to make a multi-million-pound investment. And as you go up the management chain, it gets harder and harder and harder to actually get people to sit around the table with you. These things can be done much more easily if you have that champion, because that champion will open doors for you and try and make things happen for you. They're very rare, these champions. I have found a couple in my time, but they are rare. They're much easier to find in small developers. A small developer is more likely to understand what the game is about, and in my experience, more likely to engage. Next bit of advice is use CARES. Use Christina and Mark. They have a fabulous set of resources. They have a lot of experience and expertise, and they're really, really worth going to. Now, there's lots of helpful organisations out there. There's the Community Ownership Service, there's DTAS, Community Energy Scotland, all good. But I would say your first call would be Local Energy Scotland and getting involved in the grants, in that CARES grant programme. The next 2 points are about you personally having a shoulder to cry on, about you personally having someone who can drag you out of the quagmire when it all gets too much, because it is a long and arduous journey, and you do need personal support to help keep you going. I'm trying not to be too miserable, but honestly, it's not easy, this game. And the last one there is you've got to hang on in there. I mean, hopefully it's worth it. I can't say it is yet, because as I said, I haven't pulled it off yet, but hang on in there. We'll get there in the end, I think. I hope. Next slide, please. Okay, so why is it so difficult? Is there anything that the powers that be can do to make this journey easier? The first one is just so obvious. If government really, really seriously wants to see community ownership of wind farm developments happen, they have to legislate and have to make it compulsory. There is no point in faffing about making it a voluntary arrangement, because most developers they'll be very, very keen and interested pre-planning. If they perceive it as helping them get through planning, they'll be very, very warm and encouraging about shared ownership. But once they get planning, oddly, they seem to leave their emails unanswered and just drift away. Now, it may be that, of course, they've got planning permission, so now they're going mad trying to get the wind farm built, and they just don't have time to consider the community. It might not be as cold-hearted as I may be making it sound, but it certainly happens, and it won't change unless somebody makes it compulsory and tells wind farm developers that they have to engage. And really related to that, when you talk to developers about potential models of finance and all the rest, they'll generally try and bamboozle you with why their project is different from every other project you've ever come across, and why any particular finance model won't work with their project. I don't believe that, and I think that government should lay down models. They don't all have to be there. Maybe we need 3 or 4 different models, and compel developer to use those models, so we know exactly what the milestones are. We know exactly what's going to happen, one thing after another, and we can actually get it done. Because currently, I mean, not only do I think developers obfuscate, I think they often as not, they generally don't know. They generally don't know how to fit a community ownership structure into their wind farm finance model. So we need to make it easy for them by telling them that this is how they do it. As was said earlier, we need low cost, patient finance that would even out that graph I showed you earlier, and just make it a lot easier to actually get out there. Because actually a little community group like ours going out on the open market trying to raise millions, it is a little bit absurd, and I think somebody needs to be out there taking a more honest look at what we need and what we can achieve. And also in terms of policy, keep funding cares really important. The including development officer time for people like me who are trying to make these things happen. I mean, obviously you couldn't fund it full time, you'd be bankrupt in no time, but keep feeding bits of money through so that it happens. I don't think CARES is perfect. I've got ideas of how CARES could be better, but currently it's extremely good and well worth using. And I think next slide, please. Yeah, that's it. Thank you very much for listening. I hope I haven't bored you too much. And yeah, come and visit. We're on the North Coast 500. Really good. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Simon. Okay, we're going to move into the Q&A now. I'll just go through what Kath mentioned at the start, so you can put your hand up. You can type in the chat if you prefer that. And if you can please stick to a short question rather than kind of your general thoughts on today, that would be fantastic, just in the interest of time. Kath, do you have some questions from the chat for me, or should we go into hands up?
Yes, no, there is a question here in terms of policy asks that the SCCE group are calling to the Scottish Government for, and Morven, you might be in a position to respond to this. Neil is asking what traction the group are getting with MSPs and MPs, acknowledging the recent and positive announcement from Labour on the GB Energy and the extra community energy funding, but just thinking of any other feedback or any other indications that there is take up on any of those calls to action at this stage. Sorry to put you on the spot, Morven.
No, that's fine. I don't mind. Yeah, we're absolutely getting traction. I've been doing this for 10 years and I've never been involved in a campaign that actually is getting so much traction. Whether that will translate into action or legislation changes, I don't know. But yeah, almost on a daily basis, we're getting contacted by MSPs, MPs for conversations, for visits. Um, yeah, we fed in significantly to the CARES kind of this current contract, and Community Energy Scotland and DTAS are on the advisory board for that, which is great. There's going to be a repowering working group set up. We're getting lots of asks around manifestos for next year and what should be in that. So yes, is the short answer. Amanda Grimm at Community Energy Scotland is sort of leading on the policy side of things. So Neil, if you've got specific questions on that you want me to ask, then I could put you in touch with Amanda. That'd be helpful.
Thanks, Morgan. We're already in discussion with Amanda about community benefits, etc. So yeah, I'll follow up with Amanda. Thank you.
Also, just to flag, you just made me remember that the Scottish Government have a consultation out at the moment that is mainly focused on community benefits, but there is a shared ownership section in that that relates to offshore shared ownership. I think the principles translate to onshore as well. So DTAS will be responding, CES will be responding, obviously, but if anyone wants to do individual responses, that would be really welcome. And we'll be sharing our draft response with our members in advance of the deadline, which is the 11th of.
And just to add to that, there's a Community Energy Scotland hosted webinar session on the 8th of April at, I think it's 4 o'clock, is it, or 3 o'clock, Hannah?
It's at 4, yeah. The
4
details are
o'clock.
at the end of the slides as well.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Morgan.
Cool. I can see another question in the chat from Ned about what are the essential roles or responsibilities for different stakeholders to take so an initiative can progress? Was there someone you had in mind to answer that, Ned, or?
Not necessarily. Whoever can offer the wisdom.
I didn't actually hear the question. Could someone
It's just in the chat there, Morgan. It says, what are the essential roles and responsibilities for different stakeholders to take so an initiative can progress?
In terms of the community side of things, I think seeking out the developments that are happening locally. Those planning applications will be public, and then proactively approaching the developer. Christina mentioned that the shared ownership opportunities get flagged to community councils. They're the kind of statutory body. And as she said, they legally cannot pursue a shared ownership arrangement, and sometimes that's just a kind of immediate blocker. So if you're a community organisation or an active community member, then you can be proactive in terms of actually approaching the developer yourself. They often have a communities team or someone that's focused on this. And as Simon was saying, though, what we find is there's lots of enthusiasm in that pre-planning stage for conversations. And that often can fall off a cliff a bit once they've actually got planning. So getting in as early as possible.
Yeah, and I think it's also worth saying that developers very, very rarely are upfront about having a shared ownership opportunity. You have to kick on the door fairly hard to actually get in and say, we might be interested in shared ownership opportunity.
Thank you.
Okay, we've got a raised hand from Anne, and then we'll go to Fraser in the chat. Anne, would you like to speak?
Yeah, I'm representing Highland People's Power, so we're a new BENCOM, and we're trying to fill in that sort of regional gap, because I think we've got a lot of smaller community groups across Highland that have tried to do shared ownership, but we're looking more strategically. So I think one of the things we're thinking about is that some communities may actually have an offer for, say 5%, but it's too much. So we might be sort of filling that gap in terms of. So you mentioned about split ownership. So I think that is something that we might be faced with, and I think it was having a lead organisation for that. I don't know whether anybody can go into any more detail about how that works. And the other thing we've been looking at is models for how you share out any income that comes in. If we're looking at a cross Highland model, and we've been talking to, I think it's called 9CC, so in Ayrshire, where they've developed a model where they've got basically three criteria. So they've got closeness to the wind farm or whatever, population, and deprivation index. So that seems to be quite a good model to share out things equitably, because I think otherwise there's a lot of squabbling going on. So really, so those two things: how do you do split ownership, and if other people developed any other models for how you equitably distribute funds. Thanks.
Christina, I don't know if that first part of Anne's question is something that you could help with, and I was maybe thinking the second half. I don't know. You tell me, Morven, maybe for the second half of the question with your DTAS hat on.
Yeah, so with split ownership, that's usually where you have I think in the example that I had on the slide, you have a development of 10 turbines and the community group owns 1 turbine. I think if I've understood what you were describing, it sounds like there's maybe more than one community group that's, yeah, okay, so that's a little bit of a different thing. Are you proposing that there would be 2 different investments, or that these groups would come together to make an investment?
Well, I think probably 2 different investments. So sometimes we're finding the situation where a local group has been negotiating with the developer for some time, but they don't have the capacity to take the whole amount that's on offer. So we might be able to take, a percentage as well.
Mm-hmm.
And just wondering, if other groups have done that, and how that model would work.
I'm not aware of other groups doing that. I think that could be a hard sell to developers, because it's kind of increasing the complexity for them and the number of community groups that they're working with. So, to be honest, I would be surprised. I'm not saying that it's impossible. And I think, it's always worth asking and talking to developers, putting forward a plan that works for community groups. But I think that could be a hard sell to a developer.
We're also wondering about, the council looking at some investment in projects, and whether we could come alongside as well as the council. So is that model too.
Mm-hmm.
So okay, so it's not been done.
Nope, not that I'm aware of. Anyways, Mark is here. He can jump in if he knows of somebody that's managed that. And then I think Morven was going to take the question about distribution.
Yep. So maybe just to make the point that I think there's a difference between use of revenue from a shared ownership arrangement and use of community benefit funds. Just a subtle difference, but in terms of revenue from a shared ownership arrangement, that is an investment that body, whatever body that is, has taken forward. So it is technically their money, it's their choice, it's that organisation's investment return. So it's less complicated potentially, and that it just should progress whatever that organisation's purposes are, what they're trying to do. Whereas with community benefit funds, it's a lot more contentious, I would say. And I know there's a lot of discussion at the moment about making distribution of community benefit funds a bit fairer. I guess just some like absolute key principles in terms of distribution of any funding in a community. Clearly, democracy is important in that there has to be kind of consultation and engagement with the community in terms of what they want to, where they want the funding to go. Through a good community action plan comes in. There needs to be a kind of really transparent process as well in terms of making sure that any decisions that are made are open and minuted. Yeah, it's a big question, Anne.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Morgan and Christina and Anne. A question from Fraser in the chat. When will the mapping work on repowering be completed? And then a second part, are there other private wire options for communities to take power rather than it going to the grid? So for the mapping work on repowering, would that be Christina?
I'm wondering, sorry if I can just jump in there. Could Fraser make it clear whether he's talking about the community-owned energy generators repowering, or whether you're talking about all energy generators repowering? Sorry, it might take a little while to come through. We could jump to the next part of the question. Are there private wire options for communities to take off power rather than going into the grid? Not that I know a lot of technical detail about. There's Energy Local, which is an option, but that's something we can take to our colleagues at Community Energy Scotland. There are one or two of our colleagues who specialise in that work. So Fraser, please let us know if you'd like us to take that back to them and get back to you. We're still not sure what mapping he's talking about, so maybe we could go to the next question, Hannah.
Fraser has just put another response into the chat about all of them and the opportunities that are coming up from these farms as they come up for renewal. What mapping work are you referring to there, Fraser? Because I know that the map that Christina was showing was about shared ownership rather than repowering. Maybe you could just come back to that in a minute. So I can see a question from Mike in the chat that says there could come a point where the big boys will start to see some of their considerable profits passing to community energy networks. Do you see any obvious pushback from them yet? Don't know how to pronounce it. Obfuscation, thank you, Kat. Denial, etc. are traditional methods.
Might be one more appropriate for Morven or even CES to answer. I don't know if Christina, you want to make any comment about that, or would you maybe prefer to stay out of that one? It's up to you. I know that the policy asks certainly one of the key asks for the shared ownership policy, and I think I'm right in saying this, Morven, is to address exactly that thing and trying to prevent that from happening, and to add to legislation to make sure that the commercial developers are obliged to work with communities to ensure that the shared ownership is something that they basically don't have a choice over. At the moment, there is a choice, and it's all about good relationships with communities, maybe a bit of PR on their part, or whatever reasons they have. Maybe just to be decent organisations in the community even. But yeah, it's one of the big asks is certainly to make it a policy so that they don't have a choice any longer, so they won't be able to push back.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Kath. I think there's a big push for it to be mandatory for developers to offer shared ownership, and for that to be done in a kind of transparent, open process. I personally also believe that, as well as a kind of mandatory push, we need to celebrate some good practice and have some more good practice case studies on shared ownership that will hopefully cause a bit of a kind of small snowball effect in the way that community benefits has become a pretty successful thing, and that isn't mandatory. And a lot of that is it becomes a bit of a kind of a norm because some developers do it, more developers do it, and the kind of the good practice gets celebrated. So I personally believe we need both. I think we need a strong push, as Simon says, to make it mandatory, but alongside that, actually celebrate those developers that are doing this through choice. And I don't know if I'm being naive, hope that that will then encourage other developers to follow suit.
Thanks, Morven and Kath. Okay, cool. I think we've got maybe time for one more question, if anyone has any from the group. If not, we'll move on to our wee wrap up. Fraser, I can see your message in the chat about opportunities on the horizon as older wind farms come to the end of their life and need to be repowered. I wonder if this is something that Graham, I think Graham was on the call from the Carroll Community Energy, could maybe discuss with you if you're interested. I will leave that up to you guys.
Just to highlight as well that I know Community Energy Scotland have the repowering working group that is it Evelyn that's maybe leading on that, so she might be able to answer some specific repowering questions as well.
Yeah, a really good shout there, Morven. Thank you. We can put Evelyn's contact into the follow-up email that will come out, and you can get involved that way as well. Anna, have you got a quick question for us?
Yeah, I just wondered, I gather that community benefit has to be voluntary because the Scottish Government can't mandate it, although that may be wrong, but I think that was...
That's correct. At the moment, only the UK government can mandate it.
Does the Scottish Government have the power to mandate shared ownership?
That is a good question, and one that I personally do not know the answer to. Morven?
They do not.
Oh, Christina. Perfect, thank you. My understanding is though that the Scottish Government, while they don't have the power, especially regarding community benefit, they can put pressure on the UK government. And if we get, when this upcoming edits to the advice, if it's comes through strongly, that can help the case for both of those things. So definitely want to get involved with yourself, Anne. Okay, great. I'm just going to share my screen and we're just going to do a quick wrap up from today. Thank you so much for your attention and for some really good questions. So if you can just go onto menti.com and put in this code or scan this QR code with your phone. We're just going to go through a couple questions that are going to help us to inform future events and to really get some feedback just to finish up today. If you can maybe just press the thumbs up if you managed to get in. Equally, if you don't like Menti, that's fine, and you have any feedback for us, we will gladly receive it via email. And I will be sending an email out, so you'll have my contact. Great. Okay, I've just put it in the chat in case you need another minute to scan the code or put in the code on Menti. You can kind of go through it at your own pace. I'll also show you the results as we start to go through. Oh, some of you are already on it. Great stuff. All of it is anonymous, by the way, as well. Yeah, and as I said, we're starting to plan what sort of things we're doing next year. So this really helps us to do that and make sure that it's topics that you find very useful. So if you have some topics that you'd like to be covered, if you stick them in here. Funding, always a big one. The eternal struggle of the third sector. Okay, that says microgrid. It's a little bit hard to see there with the colour. Okay, really great. Thank you guys. So even if I'm moving on, you guys can keep filling that in. You don't need to keep the same pace. Okay, and we won't show your personal data on the screen here, but if you want to be contacted about future events with ELN and other opportunities, you can just put your name, organization, email in here, and we'll stay in touch. Okay, and then just to finish up, we've got a few things coming up. Community benefits from renewables, have your say. So this is a webinar to discuss some of the questions in the updated guidance for the community benefits. So something that we kind of touched on today, and there are questions on shared ownership in there as well. So you can respond without going to the event, but the event kind of gives you an opportunity to feed into the Scottish Coalition on Community Coalition on Energy's response to. So that's on the 8th of April at 4 p.m. If you scan the QR code, it will take you to our different links for CES, and one of them is events, and you'll find it in there. At the moment, we're also collecting responses for our State of the Sector survey. So this is just, we want to get information on any community energy projects that you're doing, have done in the past, or have stopped doing for whatever reason. And this really helps us advocate for the sector as a whole, and it's really important. You can email this email address, sots@communityenergy.scot, and they will set you up. And it is quite a long questionnaire, but you don't need to fill it all in. You can just fill in the bits that you feel are most important for your organisation. We've also got an annual members conference coming up on the 24th of September in Edinburgh. And that's everything from us today. You'll get the slides in an email, and this is recorded, so it'll go on to our YouTube as well. And thank you so much to our presenters, Morven, Christina, and Simon, and Kath for hosting, as well as everyone who attended and for all of your questions. We'll give you 5 minutes back of your day. Right, thank you very much, guys. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, bye. Cheers.